Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage.
Howdy, and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam C.
And I'm Liam D.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, the albums and artists that have shaped and reshaped the sonic landscape, as well as covering new music from those artists. Today, we have a chock-full episode. We're going to be talking about what we've been listening to, some music news. We've got some questions from the Discord community we'll be tackling. And then on side B, we'll go over this day in music and an artist spotlight on Garbage, who have a new album coming out on June 11th. As well as producer Butch Vig and his legacy in the music world and some of the timeless albums that he has produced. But first, Liam.
Yeah, man.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. Excited to kind of kick back and chat about some of this stuff. It's been a busy week, so I'm looking forward to talking about some of the music that I'm digging, and definitely excited to talk about Butch Vig, man. I'm a massive fan, so this is gonna be great.
I'm a fan too, definitely. So what have you purchased these past couple weeks since we last spoke, and what have you been listening to?
So a couple things. I had a weird pickup. I was like on the Polyvinyl website a while back, and looking for something completely different, and I saw that they were selling a copy of Perfecting Loneliness, which was Jets to Brazil's last album.
Love Jets to Brazil.
Yeah, Jets to Brazil, Blake Schwarzenbach of Jawbreaker, huge fan, but I've always loved Jets to Brazil, and I've always wanted this on vinyl. It's been out of print since I was in high school, basically.
Oh, wow.
And so I never was able to get a copy or find a copy for a decent price. And Polyvinyl, it didn't put this out, but they were randomly selling it. They had like a clearinghouse kind of thing on their store. So I snagged that. Love that album.
Would that set you back?
I think it was only like 20. It was like retail. It was like $29.99 or something like that. Yeah, it wasn't anything crazy.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and also another one that I thought that I would never have this week. It's been like one of those windows where you just keep kind of stumbling upon stuff. Is an album called The Rescue by Explosions in the Sky, who I think that you're familiar with, Texas band, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah, fantastic instrumental band. And they had put out before I was really a fan of theirs. They had put out this album. I think their van had broken down, and they were stuck somewhere for 8 days, and they wrote a bunch of music around that, and then recorded it and put it out when they were on the road. And so if you went and saw them in 2005 or 2006, you could buy this thing. They did put it up digitally a few years ago, so I actually got to hear it, but I never had a chance to own it. You know, like the CDs that got passed around from that era were kind of few and far between. But so their label, Temporary Residence, re-released it. I didn't realize it. They re-released it a year or two ago, and I stumbled across a sealed copy this past week. So so that was cool. You had reminded me, Peter Gabriel, Anniversary of So. I love that album. Yes. It's such a good album. There's so many good songs on that, but Sledgehammer is obviously like a jam. I love Big Time. The music video for Sledgehammer is just so creepy. I used to run out of the room crying. My parents had to turn it off because the dancing chickens are just so weird. And then, I picked up Candy-O by the Cars. I've just been like in that place lately. And I have the self-titled, and I've got one other, but I don't have enough of their music on vinyl. And I saw that it was for a good price, and so I snagged that for a couple bucks. What about you?
Okay, so Well, I mentioned last episode that I was able to procure a copy of Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, the reissues that came out on the 28th, I believe. The local shop, which I don't blame them at all. They're a wonderful shop, wonderful people. It was a clear, honest mistake. When I got to the shop to pick up the copy that I'd purchased over the phone, it was not a copy of Loveless. It was another one of their albums, MBV.
Oh no.
So, yes. So I was really dejected, but I was like, it's okay. You know what I mean? I didn't blame them at all. I was sad about it, but I wasn't upset at them. I just had to make peace with it at the moment, and I got a refund and did all that stuff, and
Nice.
there's still a great shop, still one of my favorite local shops, but I didn't want to miss out on this opportunity to get a copy of Loveless, so I hopped on Discogs and found one at a reasonable price from a shop in the UK, because this pressing was technically only released in Europe. It's coming out of the UK, and the shops in the US got very, very limited quantities. I was even reading about shops that had a certain number of pre-orders and they didn't even get enough
To fulfill those.
shipment to fulfill the pre-orders. So
Brutal.
I found a shop online or on Discogs, Action Records out of the UK, and their shipping was £10, British pounds, which is actually about half of what most of the online retailers that I see charge for shipping. Usually it's like something between 20 to 25 British pounds, and it's just like it makes it cost prohibitive. So I picked it up, and ultimately it ended up being only about $8 or $10 more than what I would have spent if I ordered it directly from Domino and paid their shipping, which is like $16.
Not bad.
So it's coming. It's coming from across the pond.
Yeah.
And I should have it by my birthday in a few weeks, which would be a nice little gift to myself. So I'm really waiting for that. I also grabbed a few records from, I've got a buddy, Eric, who I grew up with. We went to high school together. And he not only collects vinyl, but sells vinyl. And he has some live shows on Facebook that he does once in a while, some live auction shows. And the Facebook group is called The Grail, if you want to check them out and get involved in that interesting world of vinyl sales. It's a live Facebook video, and the presenter will, show what they've got and have a starting bid, and then, folks will comment what their bid is, and, once we have a final bid, that's the selling price. I was able to pick up an original pressing of Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, which, if I'm being honest, is probably my favorite Pink Floyd album.
Cool.
It's a Terre Haute pressing, and it's in really good condition. It does not have the poster. I know you were asking about that.
I was wrong. That's Dark Side of the Moon. I thought it was different. So different album. No poster in Wish You Were Here. It was Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay.
So you're good.
Well, I'm good. It's got the original sleeve on the inside, and it's in good shape, not perfect, but I'm not the kind of collector that cares about things being immaculate or, the rarest of the rare. I'm more in it for the listening experience, but I was really happy to finally get this record, my favorite Pink Floyd album, really, really close. Dark Side of the Moon. It's almost toss up, but if I'm going to sit down and listen to a record, probably more than Dark Side of the Moon, I'm gonna put on Wish You Were Here. Also in that auction, I picked up the self-titled debut album from the Pretenders, who I'm a huge fan of.
Cool.
I picked up a copy of The Cars' Heartbeat City.
Nice.
So we both got We both got a Cars record,
We got
right? Didn't you pick up?
we got our Okasic fix this week. That's
Absolutely. Happy about that.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned it in passing, but he actually threw in, without me even, having to pay for it, he threw in a copy of Abbey Road by the Beatles, because I had casually mentioned that it was like the only Beatles studio album that I was missing.
Oh, wow.
So he threw that in there.
That's cool.
Yeah, I was really happy about that. I thanked him. But yeah, check out The Grail on Facebook if that sounds like something that interests you. I picked up from Piranha Records the solo album from Justin Hayward called Songwriter.
Okay.
Justin Hayward is the guitar player for the Moody Blues.
Right.
And I have and love the album that he did with the bass player. It's called Blue Jays. And that's just an excellent record and sounds a lot more like the Moody Blues. This one is a little bit more progressive and kind of more rock oriented than the Moody Blues records. But I sat there and listened to the whole thing front to back as soon as I got it home. It was just really, really cool listen. I also at Piranha Records picked up a copy of Magical Mystery Tour.
Sweet.
By the Beatles.
Awesome. Lots of Beatles.
Lots of Beatles. Not my favorite Beatles record.
Weird one. Yeah.
But
yeah, for sure.
It's one of the offbeat ones.
Yeah.
But it's got some essentials on there, Strawberry Fields and all that. I'm happy to have it to complete the studio LP collection. And it's probably not one that I would listen to a lot. I mean, 9 times out of 10, I'm either going to throw on Revolver or Abbey Road, but it's worth having for sure. My interesting pickup is I found, for some reason, I got on this kick of purchasing hip hop cassette tapes. I'm not a big cassette tape guy.
Right.
But the cassette tapes that I do purchase, all of them are, kind of golden era hip hop. Mm-hmm. And I found a factory sealed copy of Kool Mo D's Greatest Hits.
Wow.
On cassette at Piranha Records.
At Piranha. Cool.
And I picked it up and I have not opened it yet.
Yeah. Do you
I
have
do
a
intend
boombox
on
to play it in is the question. Do you have a big boombox with a handle?
Okay, I do not have a functioning boombox at the moment, but I do have a, component tape set.
Right.
I have a Technics tape player and I have that hooked up to my receiver. So that is something that I will definitely be opening and listening to. And I thought that deserved, a video. And so I'll be doing that when the mood hits and when the time is right.
Cool.
But yeah, still Shrink Trapped. That's basically it. I've been listening to the new Black Midi album, which came out on the 28th. It's called Cavalcade. It's definitely a challenging listen. Mm-hmm. Black Midi is sort of an experimental math rock, noise rock band from London. They're maybe kind of, it's hard to categorize those types of bands, but if you're into bands like maybe Mr. Bungle or Battles, kind of similar to that, in the same kind of vein, they'll throw in some, dissonance and some crazy time signatures and some jazz flourishes here and there, along with the just constant barrage of changes in the mood of the music. It's really, really interesting and definitely worth a listen, but cool. I've been listening to that as well. So you want to get into some of the news that's come out recently?
Yeah, sure. Well, I saw on here, so Liz Phair, new album coming out, looks like this past week.
Actually came out yesterday. Yeah. I gave it a cursory listen, and it's pretty good. It's probably going to take me a couple more listens to really get into it, right. But it did kind of bring me back to being a teenager and
Yeah.
kind of fawning over her a little bit in my bedroom. But yeah, it's her first new album in 11 years, so it's pretty interesting when an artist, goes that long without putting out any material, and then just pops up with a full blown album, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, she had a bunch of, I think, some legal issues, some personal issues and stuff, but also it's really interesting to see there's so many fantastic women singer-songwriters right now. There's this massive movement.
Oh, yeah.
And she really kind of was one of the people that set the stage for them and broke down a bunch of barriers for these women who are now kind of carrying the torch. So it's awesome to see her back. She's also going on tour. They just announced the rescheduled tour dates with Garbage and Alanis Morissette. So some real powerful women going out there. I don't know how everyone's feeling about live music. I just went to an outdoor show, first one since the pandemic. Really, I did a drive-in show at one point, but live music is back. Everybody's gonna get to it at their own pace. But the tour dates are out there. I think they kick off mid-August through the end of September, so a full month and a half run, and it's gonna be great. I mean, the three of them together is gonna be fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah. I have not gone to a show yet. I'm ready to, but I feel like I kind of have to. I don't want to just go to anything. You know what I mean? I want to make it something special. So I was really hoping that Black Keys and Gary Clark Jr. would announce a reschedule of the show that I had tickets to last year on the Let's Rock tour, but that doesn't seem like it's materializing, which is a little bit disappointing. But
right.
Have you had a chance to listen to the new Billy Gibbons album?
No, not yet. But I definitely need to kind of dig into it. That's one of those I got to throw it on in the car and drive around with it because I know that it's gonna rip.
That's exactly what I did. I put it on in the car, and I only got through probably the first half of it. But it's pretty. It's just kind of like a heavier ZZ Top. It's a rock album for sure.
Awesome.
And I really enjoyed, it's one of those records where, hold on, I'm speeding. I need to slow it down. But so far I'm liking it. That's another one that came out yesterday, and I can't wait to finish the album and hear the rest of it.
Awesome. Well, a couple other things I wanted to touch on real quick. So, obviously, Record Store Day, during the pandemic, they've been spreading it out. They've been doing these drops. So we've got the first drop of this year is happening on June 12th. You and I were kind of scanning through some of the releases. Not a ton, actually, that I'm super excited about, but one thing that that's probably worth flagging is the Tom Petty release that's coming out, just because it's so unique. We touched upon it a little bit last week, but it's called Angel Dreams, which is some of the music from the 9th Tom Petty album, which was technically a soundtrack for She's the One. But when they reissued his whole catalog in HD top quality audio, they held back that album and Wildflowers. This was a few years ago. And then when they did the Wildflowers reissue, it was Wildflowers and All the Rest, I believe it was called. They pulled some of the songs, because technically the music from the She's the One soundtrack were leftovers from the Wildflowers sessions. So they pulled some of that stuff to kind of make that package more cohesive. So this is not being branded as the soundtrack. It's being branded as a standalone replacement for that album with two unreleased Tom Petty songs, brand new Tom Petty songs that haven't ever been put out, plus a cover and some other instrumental stuff and whatever. So I like Tom Petty. I'm not a massive fan, but I appreciate him. I definitely listen to his music here and there. But it's just a super unique kind of release that is happening for this. Admittedly, I have gone to some record store days in the past. It's a weird scene, man. It's you're waiting in line, and there's scalpers that get there super early and then flip the stuff online, and it's kind of a bummer, honestly, especially because they only print like 16,000 like countrywide, worldwide for some of these things, and then that's it. It's an exciting time to go to a record store. There is a fun little buzz, like an excuse to go in there, but definitely not a waiting in line person so much.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm not typically one to want to wait in line for anything. There were a couple things that interested me. The Flaming Lips Soft Bulletin Companion. There's an Aretha Franklin live in Philadelphia, 1972 that I'm interested in. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I like that they do this, and hopefully it continues, and it does certainly kind of drum up interest in the format, which I think is important. But yeah, there's nothing that I'd be willing to wake up at 5 a.m. and get down there or camp overnight for or anything like that.
Yeah. And then the last thing I just wanted to throw out there, which I just thought was kind of fun, is I don't know if there's any folks that listened or enjoyed Parks and Rec, or if you watched that at all, Adam, but they're actually releasing.
Yes, I sure did.
They were releasing an official album from Mouse Rat with all the hits. 5,000 Candles in the Wind, Fly, Little Sebastian, all of that. And so the official album is coming out in August, but there's a vinyl pre-order. It's a limited run vinyl pressing, and the pre-order's up now. That comes out in October. So anybody who's a Parks and Rec fan, I feel like this is going to be such a weird one. Again, it could be fodder for the scalpers very easily, but it's coming out via Dual Tone. Dual Tone's a great indie label that knows how to do this kind of stuff right. So I think if you're putting in you're getting in your pre-orders now, you're probably good. They'll press a bunch of them.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. I love Parks and Rec. I'm a big Chris Pratt fan, so I'm definitely interested in that. You know what? We got some really interesting questions from the Discord community these past couple of weeks, so I think we can take a little time and dig into some of those, because they've got some thought-provoking questions here. You want to do that?
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, I saw the first one, Chris HL 94. It's nice for him to not have an NHL 94 question. And we talked about this a little in the Discord, but he asked for our opinions on what we thought the best one-hit wonder was of all time. And now I weighed in saying that I was voting for Semisonic's Closing Time, but I was going to think about it a little bit. I think I'm going to stand with that just because Dan Wilson is such a fantastic powerhouse that I feel like I can give him that trophy, so to speak, and do it knowing that he's way beyond that, but it is also just such a perfectly crafted pop song that's kind of lasted for a long time now. But I mean, there's so many weird ones. I mean, you could go to like Baha Men's Who Let the Dogs Out, or
of course,
Groove Is in the Heart by D-Light or whatever. I don't know. Did you have any that came to mind?
Well, the one that kind of was the main, and hopefully this isn't influenced by the fact that unfortunately he passed recently due to COVID, but I am actually going with Fountains of Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
They had a pretty big hit with Stacy's Mom, but my brother and I were big fans of them years and years before Stacy's Mom was a big hit. And they are kind of an amazing band. They originally were actually called Wallflowers, and Jacob Dylan, if I'm remembering this correctly, he actually kind of bought the name from them.
Wow.
because he thought it was such a great name. So I'm sure someone will fact check me on that if I'm wrong, but he was a prolific songwriter and did That Thing You Do, which is maybe one of the catchiest songs ever written. And it's kind of a shame that they didn't get more recognition for what they were doing. Also thought it was interesting that you and I kind of picked artists from kind of around the same time frame.
Yeah.
Just maybe our upbringing, but it's good question, Chris HL94.
Yeah, it could also be. I would say, like, I think that the industry kind of grew starting in the 80s. I mean, we both picked 90s bands, but like starting in the 80s, I think the industry kind of structured itself to be more conducive to have those hits. I mean, you did have a lot of one-offs, but I don't think that you consider, like Under the Boardwalk or whatever, like a one-hit wonder technically. I think that once you hit the 80s and the machine has started and MTV has kicked up, it just, and you had this mass like radio network too, that you wind up having that kind of breeding ground. So I'm sure like you could say Wipeout or whatever. Like there's so many songs that you could throw out there probably from the 60s or 70s, but it's when pop culture, like music in pop culture, that again, that MTV generation kind of kicked in, that I think that started to breed the one-hit wonders that then, I mean, it still goes on today.
The ADD generation.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it definitely had something to do with more of a push for the next big thing. You know what I mean? Everybody was looking for like, what's the next big thing? And so it was more searching for what was on the horizon rather than, earlier in pop music, you had artists that had a hit and made a lot of money, so the label wanted to milk that artist for everything that they had.
Right.
So, I think MTV may have played a big role, or just the whole, digital landscape where, things were becoming more quickly accessible, and with that comes wanting to move on to the next thing faster. And so I think a lot of that plays into seemingly having a lot more one-hit wonders. I think the 80s was the absolute golden age of one-hit wonders.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of 80s bands that, they came and had a big smash hit, and then you never heard from them ever again.
Think of Big Country or Aha or something like that. Those
huge songs.
I Would Walk 5,000 miles, 500 miles, like those songs kind of defined that era in many ways, and then you'd never heard from those artists again. Some of them had big careers overseas or went into production, but yeah, it's so crazy. I was going to say, next question we got up here. So Mecha Dragon asked, which is actually something that you and I had kind of talked about a little bit as a discussion point on the show at one point, but first album we bought with our own money. Do you remember? And where, if you can remember?
I may have even mentioned this in the previous episode, but the first album I bought with my own money was Michael Jackson Dangerous on CD. And this was back when I got my very first CD player. This was back when CDs were like $22 and came in like a large elongated paper box. I don't know. I'm definitely aging myself with this, but before CDs came in just the plastic jewel case and that was it, they came in like these, it was like twice as tall as the CD jewel case itself was. And the artwork was closer to what the artwork would look like on a cassette tape, kind of the portrait,
like vertical
orientation. Yeah. Rather than a square, like with a CD or an LP.
Yeah.
And that album, because I was crazy about, Black or White, which was a huge hit.
I was going to ask, is that the reason you saw the music video and you're like, I've got to get this album?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was my generation's Thriller.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that album, and I played it to death. And that was the first album that I bought with my own money.
Amazing. Mine was a few years later. I looked that up. That was the end of 91, was when Dangerous came out. So
Yep.
mine was a few years later. It was 96. And it was Weird Al Yankovic's Bad Hair Day.
Yes.
I mean, I had a friend, Smitty, who he had a few CDs. He had a Beach Boys CD, and the Men in Black soundtrack. He had a bunch. He was like passing contemporary music to me while I had my parents' kind of stuff floating around at home. He was passing me like the CDs that he was getting. And I remember I didn't know who Weird Al was. I hadn't seen a music video or anything, and he and I were I remember listening to it in my garage, and I was just like, this is hilarious. And also, like, it was a mashup of all these great songs. He had that polka where he like just jammed on 20 pop songs at the time. And so
he does that every album.
Yeah. So I still love Weird Al. I think he's great. I've picked up most of his records since. So it's I think he's a gateway drug for a lot of people. So I don't think that it's
definitely.
I don't think it's an odd one, but it's not as cool as a Michael Jackson record.
Well, he's definitely a gateway drug for pop music for a lot of people. I actually got to see him in concert a couple years ago with Dan, and we went to and it was actually with a full orchestra.
Cool.
And that was really, really amazing to see. Weird Al was actually my second album that I bought with my own money, and it's not one that I think a lot of people know about. It was called the Food Album, and it was more of a compilation of his work from across multiple albums, but it was all songs about food. So it had Eat It, it had Fat, it had My Bologna. So it was all the songs on the compilation were about food. That was the second album I ever bought with my own money.
That's amazing.
And then I think third was Counting Crows, and I may have misspoke on the last episode. My memory wasn't quite there in the heat of the moment. But first was Michael Jackson Dangerous. Second was Weird Al's Food Album. The third was August and Everything After.
Awesome. I'm looking at the Food Album, and it looks like he has a song called Spam that is a take on REM's Stand, and I love REM.
Yep.
And now I really need to hear that song. Like when we're done here.
Oh, you haven't heard Spam?
I'm gonna put Spam on the playlist. And I'm gonna go listen to it, and then I'll put Spam on the playlist.
It's so good.
That's awesome.
It's amazing.
That's awesome.
It's one of the best songs on that album, I think, on that compilation. All right, probably have time for one more. So Solo Something just asked this today. Mm-hmm. If you could collaborate for one day with any musician or band, be it playing or songwriting, who would it be and why them?
Yeah, I mean, this one kind of stumped me a little bit just because I do play music, but I'm pretty shy about it, and I can't imagine sitting in with anybody.
It's hard to imagine that scenario taking place at all.
But the answer that I came to, which it doesn't really have a retro spin to it, but there's a great producer called his name's Jack Antonoff. Everyone knows him from the Taylor Swift albums. He did the Lord album, but he's got his band Bleachers. He was in the band Fun. He was in Steel Train before that. I'm just thinking, like, he's a great guy. He draws the best out of everyone that he works with, be it Taylor or St. Vincent. And he did the Dixie Chicks album, which was really cool. Or the Chicks. And so I guess I took this question in a different direction, where it's like, if I'm going to be performing something or I'm going to be recording something, I'm going to sit with a guy who will, I know he plays video games, so maybe we can play some Mario Kart and write a pop song together.
Right. Right.
How about you?
I'm going big on this one because this is such an out there hypothetical situation. And I also stuck with artists who are still currently alive. I didn't want to go with something easy like, oh, I'd love to jam with Jimi Hendrix. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I'm actually going to go with Paul McCartney because he is number one, my favorite Beatle,
Cool.
one of the most prolific songwriters of all time, and just kind of the coolest guy. Like, who's cooler than Paul McCartney?
For real.
Maybe David Bowie was cooler than Paul McCartney, but even if David Bowie was still alive, I still think I would choose Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney also seems like he's a little bit friendlier. I don't know either of them obviously, but they're both very intimidating. But I've always gotten a vibe from Sir Paul of a smile and a wave, where I think David Bowie seemed a little bit more reclusive. So I think you picked the right guy.
Yeah, I definitely see that the same way. So cool. Well, man, we're kind of blowing through the time here. We're getting close to the end of side A. I think it's probably about time to flip it over. What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right, we are back. Welcome to side B of this episode number 2. And we'd like to start off side B by getting into a little bit of this week in music history. And one of the big anniversaries this past week, June 1st, 1967, the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, one of the most widely known Beatles records, to say the least, and probably one of the most interesting. What's your take on Sgt. Pepper's?
Yeah, so my mom was a big Beatles fan. I grew up with a bunch of her LPs, but it was a lot of Rubber Soul and introducing the Beatles, like the early stuff. And then when I was at college, my roommate had, I think it was the White Album. I think Piggies is on the White Album. He used to just play Piggies a bunch. He was a weird guy. But I remember like coming back to the dorm room a few times and hearing Piggies and being like, all right, this is a cool song. So I had like intermittent appreciation and exposure to the Beatles. But Sgt. Pepper, I was always aware of, but I never owned it. And I remember being at Tower Records one day, and there was some kind of like reissue, as they do, some kind of extended 3-disc or whatever it was. And so I bought that it's the first Beatles album I bought with my own money.
Nice.
I mean, especially because as I looked at the back of it, again, like I wasn't super familiar, or I thought I wasn't super familiar with the album. And then just going through it, I knew all the songs, a little help from my friends, When I'm 64, obviously title track. And then my mom kind of raised me as a George Harrison devotee. That's been my Beatle by nature.
Oh yeah.
And so, I mean, Within You, Without You is fantastic. So yeah, no, I have a very special place in my heart for this album, even though it's wacky. There's a lot of weird stuff going on this one.
It's a little wacky, but it's also, I feel, very consistent. I always feel like with albums like even Revolver to a certain extent, but certainly the White Album, it kind of goes all over the place. And while I always try to be the listen front to back kind of album experience kind of person, that this just feels like one of their most consistent albums, right up there with Abbey Road, in my opinion. And there's not a track that you're like, nah, I could skip this one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a cover to cover for sure.
And I do think that a real Beatles fan if they say their favorite Beatle is George. I think that's the mark of like, okay, they know their stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
Someone's favorite Beatle is Paul or John. They might be a real Beatles fan, but if they
Sure.
say their favorite Beatle is George from the get-go, that is a person that knows their Beatles and knows their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my mom was a fan from early on, but just her appreciation for like the musicology of what he did, as opposed. I mean, look, the McCartney-Lennon combo is one of the greatest songwriting duos, and it's like they're untouchable. But George Harrison is it's a totally different situation. Yeah.
Well, it's the total package thing. You know what I mean? They probably
Yeah.
would not. The songwriting was definitely there, but as far as the total package goes, wouldn't have been the same. It really would
For
not.
sure.
If it was just
sure.
the duo, if they did the Simon and Garfunkel thing, you still would have had some fantastic songs, but it just would not have been the same experience.
Right. It wouldn't be as consistent.
For sure. Well, moving on a little bit, and on June 1st in 1974, Alanis Morissette was born. And I still have vivid memories of when Jagged Little Pill came out, and that was huge for women in music in the 90s. Even if you weren't personally a fan of her music, you really couldn't deny just the powerhouse voice and the influence that she had on a lot of artists at the time.
Yeah, her energy was just it was so powerful. Some of those songs, it was either just in your face, anger, frustration, like candor, or it was this like sincerity. And she's out on the road with Garbage, who we're going to be talking about, and Liz Phair, as we mentioned earlier. And I'm just interested. I haven't seen her live before, and so it makes that kind of billing that much more enticing to just see, all these years later. Is she able to kind of replicate the angst of her 20s on stage now that she's a mom? And I guess, what is this, 74, almost 50? So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that would be a really, really good Welcome Back to Live Music show. Because I'm trying to, like I said earlier, I'm trying to save it for something special. Mm-hmm. And then June 2nd, 1972, Pink Floyd released their album Obscured by Clouds, which I feel like was kind of their first record that started to make waves and get them to be more well-known. June 3rd, 1942, Curtis Mayfield was born. He would have been 79 years old this year.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he passed away just a few days shy of the turn of the millennium. He died December 26, 1999. And I can't deny his influence on music as well. I mean, just amazing.
Right.
And then June 3rd, 1977, Bob Marley and the Wailers released Exodus.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Just an incredible album, breakthrough album for him, at least in the States.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest albums probably of all time. It's another cover to cover.
For sure.
The side A of that is fantastic. But then when you flip it over and look at the B side, like Jammin', One Love, Waiting in Vain,
Non-stop
Turn Your Lights
hits.
Down Low, it's insane. I mean, I think it's the album. There's more hits. There's more singles from this on his greatest hits than anywhere else. And,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible album. It was at a very contentious time in his life. There was a lot of political strife going on. There was an assassination attempt. He fled Jamaica. He had just kind of broken through internationally like a year or two before that. Mm-hmm. And so to have all of that going on and to have that success, and then to just, it's one of those perfect moment albums, right? It seems like the sauce was was just right, and it happened. And I kind of wish that I had been alive and present when this happened, because I don't know what it was like. I'm not familiar with how it was received in the time, but it seems like it had to have been, if you were in the know or you were familiar with it, it must have just been scratched the itch. It must have been the perfect thing to hear from this artist.
Yeah, I do. All I really know is that it was a top 20 album in the States. And so it was definitely on the radar of probably most of at least the music fans at the time. Otherwise it wouldn't have gotten that high on the charts.
Cool.
But yeah, obviously in retrospect, you can't it almost plays like a greatest hits album. It's just wall to wall hits.
Yeah.
And love Bob Marley, and really Exodus and Kaya are kind of the only two that I do end up finding myself listening to on purpose. Because man, you can't go wrong with Exodus or Kaya.
Yeah, they're definitely, like I said, they're cover to cover. You can just throw it on and you're in a good place.
For sure. And then June 4th, 1969, Johnny Cash released his Live at San Quentin album. Probably not quite as well known as At Folsom Prison. This was kind of a follow-up due to the success of Folsom Prison. But man, when you listen to Johnny Cash, at least me personally, I love the live albums. There's just he's just got such an energy that isn't quite there in the older studio albums, studio recordings. And then obviously it's almost a completely different Johnny Cash than what he was doing later on in life, which is amazing in its own right.
For real, yeah.
But yeah, I love those live albums from him.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, on June 4th, 1984, Bruce Springsteen released Born in the USA. Maybe one of the most misunderstood title track songs. And I'm not a huge Boss fan.
On many political campaigns, yeah.
Yes, definitely. I'm not a huge Boss fan. The only album of his I own is Nebraska, which is starkly different from Born in the USA. But he did kind of lose me in the 80s with like a lot of the synthesizers and stuff like that. Not that that's bad, but it didn't feel like what I felt like Bruce Springsteen should feel like.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of my favorite artists, and I think this was right after Nebraska, right? I think it goes, I'm trying to remember. I think it goes River, Nebraska, Born in the USA. But so many of my favorite artists now cite him as one of their primary influences, and so I've tried to revisit his music a bunch and find my entry point. And I have an appreciation for it, and there's plenty of songs that I like. I've seen him live. The energy is fantastic. His band's great. He can write a heck of a song. It just never clicks for me. It's interesting. We could go into this some other time. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but there's something about the fact that he's writing fiction. There's plenty of that in pop music, but there's something about it that never resonates with me, as opposed to the artists that I love, where I feel like they've just opened a vein and I'm seeing into their lives or just experiencing what they experience. And the way that he writes is rarely like that. He's telling a story to communicate those feelings, as opposed to just putting his blood on the page. And it's just never, it's going to be there somewhere. There's going to be something someday that it's going to click for me, but it just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. It kind of just feels like he's telling other people's stories.
Yeah, exactly.
And not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but I feel you.
He's telling his dad's stories. He's telling stories about what he saw and what he grew up around, but it's less experiential and more observational. And again, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just even when some of my favorite musicians go and write a song that is, again, I'll call it fictional. it rarely hits me like the real narrative, like personal narrative ones do. It's everybody's relationship with music and how they grew up with it. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with you on that 100%. All right, so we are now going into the meat and potatoes of our episode here. So
let's get invigorated.
We're getting invigorated with our Butch Vig and Garbage spotlight here. So on June 11th, in probably just a few days from when this episode will be online and available, Garbage is releasing their 7th studio album, which actually surprised me. I guess I wasn't paying attention to what they were doing the last 10 years or so. I was surprised to learn that was actually going to be that this is going to be their 7th studio album. No gods, no masters. And it is their first album in about 5 years. Strange Little Birds came out in 2016. And because it's not out yet, I don't have a reaction to the entire album, obviously, but there are 3 tracks available at the time that we're recording this. And they're bangers as far as I'm concerned. I was blasting them in the car, and I love these new songs. I think they're fantastic.
Wolves hit me. I mean, Men Who Ruled the World is such a Shirley Manson song. Like, she has just leaned into her narrative and writing and her opinions, and I'm here for it. I she and I agree on a lot of things. But it's interesting to go back to some of the earlier songs and hear that sort of like perspective in there, but just maybe not as stark or done in a different way. And I think that you can see that she's grown into her kind of comfort level and confidence or whatever it is, to just kind of lay it all out there and just not mince words and just kind of be very stark about what she's trying to get across. It's really good. Wolves for me has been the song of the 3 that have come out so far. It's got that Garbage energy to it. It rips. It's got some meaning to it. So yeah, I'm excited for this one for sure.
Yeah, Wolves is definitely my favorite of the 3. Not by a huge margin, though. I love the other songs. Speaking of the songwriting, I was interested to learn in digging into their first album, the self-titled album from '95, that she had never actually written before that album. So that is kind of her very first dive into actual songwriting. I guess her previous projects, she wasn't actually writing the material, she was just performing. And it is really, really interesting to see the growth and to see just kind of the difference in the energy. Plus with that first album, they were still kind of just trying to figure out what they wanted to do. Yeah. And I remember reading a little bit about the audition when, the band was there. The first audition. Yeah, the band was there, and she's quoted as saying that the first audition was terrible, that it went horribly wrong.
She was nervous. I mean, you have to think she's standing in front of Butch Vig, three fantastic musicians and producers, but Butch Vig, who had just come off of producing, which we'll get into, but some of the most important albums in rock those few years before. I had Nevermind by Nirvana, Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins. I mean, so she walked in there performing and auditioning for someone who was, it must have been a very intimidating situation to be in, for sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. That would feel to me similar to, what my experience might be like working with Paul McCartney if I got that opportunity.
From earlier,
I might be too nervous to, really be able to display what I was capable of. So, but thankfully they got along so well outside of the recording aspect. And, with that connection that they were able to make, tried it again and got it to work, and we are very, very glad that they did.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to kind of think about also just the environment of what was going on in rock at that time too, for a band like this to come out. I mean, 95, you haven't had that mainstream slickness to rock. You're not in your pop rock, pop punk, whatever it is that comes later on in the decade and early into the 2000s.
It was all grunge.
You have grunge, but it's like it's kind of transitionary. And again, we're talking about Butch, who was the mastermind for a lot of those important albums in grunge, and then kind of again he is creating this band with these artists that is then going to transition to massive mainstream success. I mean, Nevermind as a grunge album is slick. It is. I mean, Cobain has, and he contradicts himself all the time, so you can't really lean on what he's saying at any point anyway. But he at many times was saying that he hated the production on Nevermind, that it was too slick and that the success was too much, and it was too over the top and catapulted him to this great success. And so then you look at some of these garbage albums that we're going to talk about, and in a matter of like 3 years, this band puts out 7 hits, something like that, 6 or 7 hits, like syncs in movies and TV shows. It's just, it's wild what they pull off. And again, like this thread of Butch Vig through the whole thing of just this, like, this mastermind behind the scenes who's very humble, super smart, very engaging. I can't speak highly enough of this guy. Like I'm a big Butch Vig fan, if it doesn't come across already.
Yeah, absolutely. I am too. Yeah. I mean, so, and one of the anniversary albums this year, we are 30 years from the release of the first kind of big Smashing Pumpkins album, Gish. That came out in 91. And that was the same year that Butch produced Nevermind. Right. So he just kind of right out the bat with his, at least, more well-known artists. You've got that first Smashing Pumpkins record, and you've got the breakout Nirvana album, Nevermind, the same year. And so, no wonder Shirley Manson was nervous and intimidated in that audition. In 1992, he produced Sonic Youth's Dirty, which was kind of one of their more commercially successful albums. Turned right back around in 1993 and produced Siamese Dream, which was more of their breakout album for Smashing Pumpkins. 94, another Sonic Youth album with Experimental Jet Set. And then it's kind of interesting when you look at the list, because then there's kind of a large gap.
He became a rock star.
Exactly.
Like a pop star, really. Like he went from behind the scenes producer to being a rock star. And what's interesting is, I mean, you say like he's simultaneously basically working with Billy Corgan at the beginning of his career and at the launch of what the Smashing Pumpkins become, and is also working with Nirvana. And Nirvana, so Butch had been working with Sub Pop a bunch, right? And Nirvana is on Sub Pop, at least initially, and then there's the whole kerfuffle where that doesn't happen anymore. Right. But he gets like enlisted onto that project, but then doesn't know if he's actually, like, they do the demos and then he doesn't actually know if he's going to be doing that. So then he goes and does Gish, and he's working on that with Billy. And it seems like, by all accounts, they get on great, because as we can get into, like, Butch loves layering. I mean, you listen to Disarm off of Siamese Dream, for me, is just so fantastic. It's just
beautiful, heartbreaking song.
It's raw, but it's drenched. Like it's so good. And it seems like Billy was very receptive to that, whereas Kurt apparently not so much. Right. Butch made the point that Lennon and McCartney, as we talked about earlier, Lennon and McCartney did overdubs and tracking and such. So it's not something that he should be that shy of. But I think Cobain wanted this raw one takeness kind of
the
sound
punk
to
sensibility.
it. Yeah, right. And Butch, as you see, especially with Garbage and even some of the later stuff. But again, when you think of what Nirvana was before Nevermind, or you think about Smashing Pumpkins as they go through into Siamese Dream, Butch is he's known as this guy who can maintain a punk sensibility, but he gives it that pop palatable.
He makes pop records.
Sense. He does, but they're still garage punk enough to be authentic. There's a bunch of bands that he has worked with over the years that value him because he rides that line so well. And again, we go back to Garbage. You look at Only Happy When It Rains, Stupid Girl, Queer, like those early songs that are counterculture, tongue-in-cheek, like Only Happy When It Rains is he and Shirley had been watching MTV and listening to the radio, and everybody was miserable, and they're like, okay, well, I'm going to write a sarcastic song about that, you know?
Exactly.
And then it takes off because it's catchy as heck, and it's really great. Like it's well written and catchy, and the guy just knows how to marry those two sounds so well.
And as is the case with most satire, I think the sarcasm was lost on most people.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Maybe because of her look or whatever. Okay, so what was the first Garbage song that you remember hearing, and what your reaction was to it?
That's a great question, and this is going to be, I think, consistently. You and I are probably going to, both from age and tastes and experiences and whatever. Like, I think you and I are going to consistently have a little different situation. So mine is actually, I remember seeing the music video for Push It, which is off of version 2.0, the second album. Yeah. So I definitely had heard of Garbage, and I'd probably heard Only Happy When It Rains. But 96, 97 is when I started like actively getting into my musical tastes. Yeah. And so I remember the music video for Push It was really creepy. It was black and white, and then like just odd. There was a guy in a suit, but he had a light bulb for a head. It was so weird, man.
Yeah, it was one of those weird ones.
It was so odd. And so it hooked me, weird teenage me. Like, I was like, this is so cool. And I went to the wall and I bought it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, she's cool and gorgeous. And then like, you see, it was either Hammering in My Head or I think I'm Paranoid, where like she sticks her fist in her mouth and she's just like tossing her hair around, and it was such a cool vibe. So that was my thing. It's interesting. My wife loves the movie Romeo and Juliet, which is a huge film I hadn't seen at the time. That was another one that like that number one crush, not on an album, like was a B-side from their first album that winds up, I think it's one of their only like actual number one hits. Like they had so many top 10 hits, but it's only one, one of their only number one hits, off of this monster soundtrack, one of the most iconic soundtracks of that like era of the 90s, before you get into American Pie and all of that, like that real, like it was Love Fool by the Cardigans. Like there was a bunch of things on that soundtrack that it sold like crazy. It launched that movie.
Radiohead is on there.
Yep. Yeah.
Really good soundtrack.
So I remember hearing Number One Crush after that, and then going back to buying the first album after I bought version 2.0. What about you?
I actually remember seeing the music video for Queer on MTV.
Oh, man. Cool.
And of course, instantly fell in love with Shirley Manson. I mean, I would have been like 13, something like that. So I was like, plus for some reason I've always gravitated towards those kind of scary women. Yeah. Like I loved
intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know we don't need to go there. We'll just leave it at that. But instantly was a fan, and I just remember it being kind of like, oh, should I even be watching this? Like, you know, because it's got a little bit of some sexual themes to it.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
being 13, you just kind of like look over your shoulder, make sure that, you know, no one's walking in the room while you're watching the music video. But
Hilarious.
And it had a kind of a little bit of a trip hop feeling to it, which I really dug. And it really affected me in a positive way, and I was a big fan from the get-go. The next memory that I have is seeing the music video for Special, which is very weird, but you know, they're like dog
like
fighting.
a jet fighter.
It's almost like these old timey kind of steampunk airplanes and they're dog fighting and stuff like that. Just a weird concept for a music video. And also a little bit of a departure from what most of their hits sounded like, where it was kind of more of an upbeat sounding song.
Yeah.
And so I remember that quite vividly as well. But then after that, they started to kind of fall off my radar.
Well, I think that happened to a lot of people. I mean, there's a weird thing that happened there where, and I tried to think a bit about it because we knew we were going to talk about this week, because I didn't buy the third album as well, and it seemed like it was a consistent thing. It just underperformed for whatever reason, and I went back and I listened to it again, and it's great. You know, it's really good. I don't know why it didn't connect, especially because they did a Bond song, you know, like that. Yeah. Like so few people get to sing a James Bond song.
That's a very special honor for sure.
So cool. Yeah. And then they come out with a great third album that it didn't connect. And I don't know, upon re-listening to it, like Androgyny's a great song. There's a bunch of singles that they pushed
it's
for
consistent.
it didn't stick like the others. I think I kind of chalk it up to two things. One, you just never know. 2001 was a weird time.
Oh, it sure was.
So you don't know. I can't, to delve back into what was going on sonically there in pop culture is tough. But also, as a band grows and kind of gets to that level where they had written so many hits and they were in all these movies, they start kind of experimenting and expanding with what they want to represent and sound like and write. And it might have just been a little bit of an oil and water thing. It could have just been like, you know, because it seems like, I look back, the promotion was there. There was a lot of push and interesting like remix opportunities and stuff that like they pushed this. It wasn't, you know, you'll see some albums that just get shelved or they just get rolled out and they never get pushed. And it seems like it just didn't connect for some reason, but it's definitely worth going back to. I highly suggest that third album has a lot of great songs on it.
It does. And you know what may also have been a major factor is it came out right around 9/11, which kind of put a damper on everything, life itself. Yeah. So that could have played a big factor. But then at the same time, you had other albums that came out around that time, like Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. And like that was huge for Wilco. Yeah. Like we know who Wilco is, or most people know who Wilco is today because that album was so popular. So it's kind of hard to say, you know, the first Strokes record came out around that same time too. So, you know, you can't just blame it on 9/11, but it definitely could have played a major factor.
Yeah.
And especially after that, they just kind of like... they lost me personally, but I would still go back and listen to the first couple of records pretty consistently. Yeah.
And so speaking just for myself, like I kind of, as much of a bummer as it is for that band, although obviously they've been able to, you know, keep going all these years. We're talking about their 7th album. They're going back on tour. Shirley's got her own radio show and everything, but and they've you know, consistently released music every few years. But for me, there was this run of albums while I was at college, and I was kind of like having my next kind of discovery of music that I liked in my musical identity. And it wasn't until the Jimmy Eat World Chase This Light album that I realized, because I started digging into the liner notes a bit more of some of my favorite
start to pay
artists.
attention.
And I'm like, I'm seeing this name and I know
Everywhere.
that he's in, and I go back, and it's interesting. So he did Sing the Sorrow by AFI, which was their major label debut after 5, I think, like legit punk records, like goth Misfits-esque punk records. They did the thing that we were just talking about. They had to come up with a pop sound for their club and their punk club energy, and so Butch is the guy that the labels go to for that, and the bands want to go to marry that together. And Butch he was quoted, like he was approached by them to do this, and he didn't get it at first, and he went to a show, and he saw the way that the audience sang and chanted and engaged with that band again in that like
they have a
communal
rabid fan base.
punk. Yeah, I mean their shows, especially back then, but even now, it was such a communal punk situation that he walked out of that and he said, I want to do this, but I want to make sure I can represent that on the album. I have to find a way to make sure that comes across here. And I think he did it really well. It definitely plays. Against Me, another band that raw punk kind of sensibility, that they broke through with their pop sounding record, New Wave, and then he came back and did White Crosses, which I think everyone should check. That album is fantastic. Is the second album he did with them. I'm a huge Jimmy Eat World fan, and Chase This Light is almost like too sweet. Like they're already a pop band. Everybody knows The Middle.
Yeah.
And this is 2 albums after The Middle. They had just come off of a pretty raw but powerful album called Futures that had a bunch of hits on it. And they were looking for something else. And it's kind of a unique situation with them because they had already found their pop success. And so I love that album, but it's not as highly regarded as some of the others because I don't know if it was the right marriage. It works for me as a fan of that band and a fan of Butch, but I don't know if it's what they needed at that point.
I'd have to go back and listen to it. I have actually not heard either of those Against Me albums, and it would be interesting in a retrospect to see what those are all about.
White Crosses is gorgeous, and just as a side note, I mean, so as they were making that album, you had the lead singer, Tom Gable, at the time, who was coming to terms with the fact that he was actually a woman and became Laura Jane Grace.
I do remember that.
And there's so much on that album that now, knowing her, you can go back and see what she was going through, and there's moments on that album that just choke me up. But again, there's this pop sensibility. There's this it's so easy to listen to. It's the thing that you'll get stuck in your head. There's a song on that album that I can't play in the house because my wife will just she'll wake up and have it stuck in her head. It's so catchy. So I won't put that on the playlist.
You kind of have to now.
I guess maybe. I'll touch on real quick, just 21st Century Breakdown by Green Day is another weird situation. There's a lot of great songs on that album, but again, that band had found, I would say probably its third, if you're saying like Dookie and then again Nimrod and then again American Idiot, like they had already found their pop success 3 times. So going to Butch for this one seemed an odd move again. There's some really solid punk songs on there, but they were writing this opera, and I think that they wanted it to go back to their roots a little bit, but still be catchy. They needed to keep their American Idiot crowd. And it succeeds at moments. It's definitely not, it's not one of my favorite Green Day albums, but there's a few songs. That's one where I think it was hampered by the fact that it was 5 years after the album before it. And the album before it had 4 massive hits that reinvented that band. You were never going to live up to it. The band was pressured to live up to it and didn't know what to deliver. So they delivered what they wanted to and what they thought would work. And it kind of fell flat a little bit.
Yeah, I literally don't even remember it coming out. That's how.
Yeah. Well, and a part of it was the single that they went with was just this very generic anthemic thing that just gets repeated over and over again. It's just not interesting. And I remember listening to it as it was being released and hearing, I'm sure you've had this happen before, where the single that's on the radio is what it is. And then you listen to the album and you're like, what about this song? Like, why didn't they put this out instead? This is the hit. Yep. This would have done it, you know? And so, yeah, there's 2 or 3 songs on that album that should have been singles, I think. But I understand they thought that they had a path or a promotional plan or whatever, and it fell flat. Yeah. We should talk Wasting Light, though, for sure.
Yes. And if we're talking Foo Fighters albums, and this is as a Foo Fighters fan from day one, hearing This Is a Call on the radio before I even knew who was in the Foo Fighters at the time.
Right.
Wasting Light is probably my second favorite Foo Fighters album.
Wow.
After Color and the Shape.
Yeah.
And
it's a great one, man.
For those that don't know, the concept kind of started when Dave Grohl was basically saying, you know what? I have this old Nev board in like above his garage basically, and called up Butch and was like, hey, I want to make an analog album, record it to tape and do it in my garage.
Like actual garage, like not like a fancy garage, but legitimately like a 2-car garage.
So that was kind of the spark that got that album off the ground, and I just think it's one of their best. It has really, really good songs. It's so punchy and raw sounding, but still polished and poppy in the way that Butch knows how to marry those two things. And it's just one of those albums that I can really put on front to back, and then I want to start right back at the beginning again. I love it.
Yeah, and you have to wonder also, I mean, the setup there must have been so crazy and so unique, and it wasn't even just that. It wasn't just that it was in the garage, but that everything had to be done to actual tape. There was no Pro Tools magic or anything that goes on there. It's actually to tape, like analog tape, which isn't anything about, I mean, obviously Butch was doing that before all the stuff that we were talking about here, but as we've talked about him becoming this like top tier, sought after, slick pop savvy producer, then to suddenly be yanked back to everything is cut. You're actually pulling out your knife and you're cutting up tape to make your edits. It's got to be weird, and also to have Chris Novoselic from Nirvana on this album. I mean, to reunite basically Grohl, Butch, and Chris must have been to be in the room for that. Like, wow, that must have been amazing. Insane. Yeah.
And then that leads right into the Sound City reel-to-reel soundtrack, if you want to call it that. If for those that don't know, Sound City was a documentary, 2013, I believe. And if you're a music fan, you haven't seen it, you really need to see it. It's basically centered around this one recording studio that is, probably most famous for Fleetwood Mac, but just so many artists. And that's where the Nev board that Dave Grohl now owns came from. And so he created this documentary around the studio and around the board and the performances that happened there. And so they were like, well, why don't we take this board and make make a final Sound City album. And there's just, they bring in Stevie Nicks, Trent Reznor, Paul McCartney. And there's a song on that album that's basically Nirvana, but with Paul McCartney in place of Kurt Cobain. It's
So
Paul
crazy.
McCartney, Dave Grohl, Chris Novoselic, and Pat Smear. And it's like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Just incredible. And that's probably my favorite song off of that album, but there's a lot of really cool collaborations on that album. It's definitely worth a listen.
Yeah. And then Butch comes back, I think in part to produce or co-produce Sonic Highways, which
Yeah.
again, another theme sort of album, whereas Wasting Light was, let's get back to roots, let's get back to basics. And then Dave says, all right, well, we're gonna go around the country, and I think there was an HBO show for it as well. Where they just went to some of the most important American cities and explored and then wrote a song for in each one or for each one.
And I remember subscribing to HBO just to watch it, and it's a really cool concept. I'm not as big of a fan of it as far as the songs are concerned, but I love the concept and the collaborations and what they did. I think I like it more as a companion piece to the documentary series or the TV series than as an album to listen to for me personally.
Yeah, I admittedly haven't spent a lot of time with it, but I did kind of flag there is that song with Gary Clark Jr. for the Austin.
Yep, I was just gonna say
episode,
that Austin one is the best. That was the best episode in my opinion.
Not biased at all.
Actually, the DC one is really, really cool as well.
Okay, yeah.
That's basically it. He did the newest or most recent Silver Sun Pickups album in 2019, which I honestly haven't even listened to yet, but I'm looking forward to digging into that when I have the time. Love that band. But now he is back doing the Garbage thing, and it's kind of interesting to go back and look at the dates of the Garbage album releases and the big producing gigs that he did, and see how they kind of weave in and out of each other on the timeline.
Yeah, you can see like he obviously is at a point where he gets to kind of pick and choose the projects that he wants to work on, and
as he should.
And then if he takes on a production gig, and then he can jump over to, if he gets inspired for a Garbage thing, he's had 2 or 3 other side projects that he's done as well in the past few years. So it's great to just see someone again who is very inspired and obviously has had this incredible impact on the music that we love, who kind of gets to do and be creative in the way that he wants to. And I again, going back to it, like, I'd love to see him just play drums. Like, I'd love to just go see, like, that's one of those things where you go to a show to hear the songs that you love or to have a great experience, a great night. But there's also some of those shows where you go because you just want to see someone play guitar. You just want to be in the presence of someone doing something. And seeing Butch Vig play drums is just so cool.
The coolest. Absolutely.
Yeah,
well, Liam, this has been an invigorating episode.
Yeah.
For sure.
Nice. I like it.
I'm really excited that we got to talk about all this great stuff. We clearly didn't even have time to touch on absolutely everything, but I think we hit all of the major highlights, and appreciate your insight on everything. And this has been really, really fun. I love doing this. I can't wait for episode 3.
Yeah, man, this is great.
Thanks for listening to Retro Groove. We are part of the RetroLogic Network. Check out the website, retrologic.games, for social links, merchandise, community, and more. And with that, we will see you next time on Retro Groove.
Bye.